Today, I'm joined by Eric Hadar, CEO of Allied Partners, for a conversation about how he built the real estate titan. We talked about how he bought Citigroup Tower for $700 million, where Eric learned how institutions think and why Wall Street's short-term incentives can create rare opportunities for long-term builders. Then we go deep on the 7-year saga of 285 Lafayette, where he coined the term Nolita and how he was 1 week away from losing everything on that deal. If you've ever felt like you're one step away from failure, this conversation was a great reminder for me, and I hope for you as well, that opportunity and luck shows up most often for the people who stay in the arena long enough to catch it, like Eric. Here you go.
I was studying and you said something along the lines of like, there's this quote, you're like 1+1 = 3. And you always try to look for partnerships.
Always, because it doesn't have to be two partners that are in co-investing, but both sides have to win. And there's too many people, I believe, that don't. They come into a transaction with a philosophy that they clear the table and leave the other side with nothing.
Yeah.
It's a victory.
Yeah.
And that's evil.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, that doesn't make for very many successful projects and transactions. I always feel good if everybody wins and one is more than two. So if that's like, not something I realized until later in my career, unfortunately.
Were there stories in the past where your ego got in the way, or where you left everyone winning and then it was?
When I bought, there was 4 corners on 57th Street and Fifth Avenue.
Yeah.
Right? Tiffany on the southeast.
Yeah.
There was the Warner Brothers studio store on the northeast.
Yeah.
Van Cleef in the northwest, and Bulgari on the southwest. If you think of the Ginza, the Champs-Élysées, I mean, how many intersections in the world are like that? And that's probably up there, right, in value. So Van Cleef and Bulgari were owned. It runs the Crown Building. It's never going to be sold. Tiffany, obviously, wasn't for sale. So this opportunity to buy the northeast corner was a once in 5 lifetime opportunity. And I had partners. And when we formed the partnership, the partner said, we'll pay $15 million to buy out the tenant. It's such a valuable corner. And I got the tenant to leave. And then I went to the partners and said, okay, let's buy them out. They said, no, we don't want to buy them out. It's too risky.
Yeah.
I said, trust me, it's so good. This corner will rent or sell at some number. I can't tell you exactly, but I know in my heart that it's going to be valuable. And so they wouldn't do it. So I started to have discussions I'd be starting to get calls from all these luxury retailers that were coming in. So I started to get calls because in those days, Fifth Avenue from 57th Street down was mainly middle American retailers. We had the M&M's building, Coca-Cola, Disney, Lego, Warner Brothers studio stores which sold Superman dolls and things like that. Luxury in the way we know it now, with Gucci and Chanel and Louis Vuitton, was just starting to come in to that district. And this corner on Fifth Avenue had the Warner Brothers studio store with a Superman elevator in the corner. And their lease was, they had 7 5-year options to renew. And I also knew that they had one other store in Manhattan in the middle of Times Square, one Times Square, triangular building.
Yeah.
And I went into the store on Fifth Avenue and I spent 1 week there, 7 hours, something like that a day, at the cash register. And I was writing down their sales. And I realized that people were coming in, and I think it was an 11-story building, and 9 stories were retail, in the top tier office. But they were selling basically stuffed animals, souvenirs, all the Warner Brothers characters from the movies and the cartoons and things like that. And their average sale was like $9. And there was no way, unless you had lines around the block, that you could ever, make the rent, even though it was cheap. It was, I think, I want to say 4 million or 4.5 million. And I think the net income was about 3 or 3.5 million after taxes and all that. So we bought the building for $53 million. And it was owned by a Japanese company, life company. And I saw this luxury starting to shift, right? So all these luxury retailers started to become interested in this Fifth Avenue corridor. And everything was turning. And my partners didn't want to put up the money because they were worried about a vacant building and how long it would take to lease, how much money they have to spend. So I flew out to LA and I met with Warner Brothers. And Warner Brothers doesn't think about real estate, they think about their corporate brand. They made a decision to shut all the Warner Brothers stores down nationally. They just wanted out the business. So they weren't looking at every single location trying to maximize value. And instead of having to pay them, they offered to pay us. Because I said, look, if you leave, you've got this Superman elevator, which is glass. I've got to get rid of that. I don't know how long it's going to take to find a tenant. I don't know how much money it's going to cost to put the tenant in, brokerage commissions and all the rest of it. It could be millions. So they said, well, I said, how about this? And this is, again, goes back to the idea of a win-win. I said, if you put up $5.5 million and I don't need to use it, somehow the building gets sold or rented for way more, then I'll give you the money back. And I thought that was a very fair offer. And they accepted it. And they sent me back home with a big frame poster of Superman signed. Somebody at Warner Brothers, I don't remember. But they were thrilled with that deal. So I come back to the partners and they said, well, we're not going to agree. So what do you mean? I said, we went into this whole with the idea that we were going to try to pay $15 million. Now they're paying us. How could you say you don't agree? So now we become adverse. And in the law, when you become adverse, because I was the managing partner, you're no longer held to a fiduciary duty of disclosure. And I started to get calls from 8 or 9 very, very high-end luxury retailers. Gucci, Chanel, Swarovski Crystal, Louis Vuitton, literally every, then next to Warner Brothers was a little boutique called Zegna. Gildo's an Italian clothing store, which is in a small, very narrow townhouse. And I walked into the store and I said, can I speak to Mr. Zegna? I didn't know if it was a Mr. Zegna at all. Turns out that there was a Mr. Zegna, and he was in the store. It was his son. And his name was Gildo, because his father was a Gildo, and his son's name was Gildo. So I told him, I have this building next door. Would you be interested? And he went crazy. So now I go to the parties and I said, I can get Zegna wants it. I got Chanel calling me, but do you have anything definite? I said, I can't tell you I have a definite, but I have a feeling that there's no question. So long story short, it's November. We sign a contract to buy the building. And by December, 3 weeks later, we are, at odds. And
You and the
now,
partners.
we in the partners. So we negotiate. So I stop all the discussions I'm having, sign a contract to buy out the partners, and I give them a list of everybody I've spoken with, their name and their phone number. and they're email. And I say, I don't want to say who's going to take the building because I don't want you to come sue me after. So we're going to wait 3 weeks or a month. I forget exactly the time. There's 8 people that have called. I want you to call these 8 people and you decide if you still want to sell or not. So they said, okay, that's fair. So we sign a contract. And now it even gets more, the activity starts to increase and the word's spreading that, I'd signed the agreement with Time Warner. So now, once we agreed on the contract, I went back, signed the Time Warner agreement. They put the 5.5 million in escrow, having agreement to close with the partners, but I delayed it to give them time to make these phone calls. We go to the closing because my lawyers are telling me, Eric, this is what's going to happen. They want an option. They want the money from you, and then if you make a lot more, they're going to come sue. So I'm young and I'm listening to my lawyers. This is what they're telling me. So I said, okay. Long story short, I did not want to sell the building, first of all, because I knew that, buying this building again would never be a possibility. And all I would do is lease it. And the problem was that nobody was willing to lease it at anywhere close to the price Louis Vuitton was willing to pay. So Bernard Arnault, who was building this big luxury conglomerate, was willing to pay anything for this corner because he wanted to put Louis Vuitton's flagship. What nobody realized, and this goes back to real estate not being this sort of quantitative box, that you have to look at a building amorphously as an advertising vehicle, an operations vehicle. The quality of the building obviously matters, the size matters, but most importantly, in some cases, the branding could be, they could spend $100 million in advertising all over the world and not get the value of having a flagship building on this corner. And I'm thinking, well, that's going to be the way they look at this. They don't need to make money in the store. They just need to have the store so they can put their name on it. So we paid 53. I think we paid 53 and we roll into 57. And then they ended up paying 204, which was a record. I mean, by times 10 per square foot. But the idea was it was all marketing. And now I look back and I say, that building is probably worth 10 times the 2. Could be worth $1 billion or 2. I know they're building a lot taller building now and all the rest of it, but still, the 200 million looked so good then because they didn't have a lot of money, so it made sense. But they sued anyway.
The partners?
Well, the partners, we won the lawsuit. I then went to meet with one of the partners, and he said, "Would you settle for 50,000 to avoid appeal?" So I go back to my father, 50-50, and he said, "I don't want to settle. I don't settle. If I settle, it will set a precedent. I don't want to do that. I believe in the fact that they're correct. They had every right to make the calls, and it is what it is." So, long story short, I should have just paid the money myself. I didn't. They appealed. They won. Since that appeal, there's been 3 other cases exactly the same, which have reversed that decision. Because in those days, that was a big decision, landmark case. It's since been overturned, and you can waive your fiduciary duties. What the appellate division said was you couldn't waive fiduciary duties if you were still in a partnership that hadn't closed. But obviously, there's situations like this where that would be an exception. Long story short, we had a mediator or an arbitrator come in and they split the difference, and we still made out fine. And then we did a 1031 exchange into the Citigroup building.
I see.
And that's, that was probably the most, That was the most visible, high profile transaction that we did. I wouldn't say the Citigroup building was the most creative, but what was interesting about it was I only had 3 weeks because I wanted to buy it before it came to the market. Because I knew once it came to the market, the whole world would be looking at it. Who was I? Nobody would ever believe that I would buy it. And the New York Times ran articles that said, "Who's this kid that's buying the Citigroup building?" It leaked out, and we're doing this preemptive purchase, and that's when I told you I went up to the top and I hung down in the middle of December.
Yeah.
I only had 3 weeks, and everybody was on vacation for Christmas, and after Christmas they were going back, so I canceled my trip. I planned a trip with my family. 3 weeks to do due diligence. I hired accountants, physical engineers to deal with all of the engineering issues, lawyers, financial, due diligence experts, and so on. And I ended up getting the contract. And the interesting part of the story was Daiichi, which is a big Japanese life company, was partners with Citigroup. And Daiichi owned 2/3 of the Citigroup building, and Daiichi owned 1/3. And Citigroup owned 2/3 of 399 Park Avenue, which is still probably the top building in New York in terms of prestige. And Daiichi owned 1/3. So they agreed to do a tax-free exchange where Daiichi would own 100% of Citigroup. Citigroup would own 100% of 399 Park. And then simultaneously, Daiichi would sell Citigroup to me. All in the same,
One transaction.
law firm, but 3 different conference rooms, right? But all in the same transaction. And we're getting ready to sign this, and I get a call from a guy that lives a couple blocks away named George Comfort. Who's George Comfort? He's a guy that runs special projects for Citigroup all around the world. They do big energy projects, government contracts, and stuff that you don't really know about. Off the radar stuff. So he says, Sandy Weil, who was then the CEO of Citigroup, wants to meet you. So I said, okay. And I go meet Sandy Weil at the Citigroup building. And he was on the second floor, not the top. And I said, the elevator gets opens, the doors open, and there's Sandy Well pacing back and forth in front of the elevator. I get out. He says, "Hi, how are you?" I said, "Fine." Takes me into his office. And he says, "I want to ask you a question." I said, "Sure." He said, "We're doing this trade with Daiichi, right?" I said, "Yeah." Daiichi's going to end up owning 100% of our building. So I go, "What about if we come back in and buy 50% of the building with you?" I said, "That sounds fine. What do you have in mind?" The only problem is that if we do this and it gets out to the press, it's going to look very embarrassing for Daiichi. So we can't have anything in writing. I said, "Well, how would that work?"
Yeah.
He says, "Well, we'll give you the money at a very high rate of interest, and you then will convert it'll be convertible debt. You'll be able to convert into equity, and I'll know that you'll be able to, that you'll do it because you don't want to pay the high rate of interest." So I said, "Sounds good." He says, "How are you financing this?" I said, "Well, we have a loan from Deutsche Bank for $525 million. We have a $200 million commitment from the government of Singapore for another 200, and I have the money from the sale of 57th Street." So he calls this guy named Bill Rubin. Who's Bill Rubin? He was the Treasury Secretary under Clinton. He's now working for him. He's a couple of offices down the hall. Into his office, and he says, "Bill, call the government of Singapore and find out if they're going to close on the 200 million." So Bill says, sure, I'll be right back. 10 minutes later, he comes back into the office and says, yep, they're going to do the deal. So Sandy says, shake hands. My handshake is my bond. So I said, I want to think about it overnight. So I go home and I'm thinking to myself, well, if he does, we have nothing in writing, and I have a loan, and he says it's convertible into equity, what happens if, God forbid, he doesn't agree to convert it and he forecloses on me? I don't know. So I called his guy, George Comfort, back, and a young guy picks up, a guy I went to Columbia Business School with. And I said, unfortunately, I thought this over, and I'm a little bit nervous that this whole transaction is not going to be in writing, and God forbid something goes wrong and they don't honor the agreement. What do I do? And all of a sudden, you didn't need a phone. You could hear him screaming so loud and cursing and yelling and screaming like a lunatic with every epithet I don't even want to repeat and can't. But trust me, it was not a pleasant call, and they were very upset. But I realized that, it was too big a risk to do. So I ended up closing with Boston Properties, and we rebranded the building as 601. Citigroup actually moved out. That was the big risk. I didn't want to own it because Citigroup had the first 15 floors. If they moved out at the end of their lease, the tenant improvement costs, the brokerage commissions, the free rent, the downtime was obviously not. It wasn't a tangible number. It could have been $50 million, which I didn't have, and I didn't want to take the risk. So I wanted to have a partner. So we ended up with a great partnership with Boston Properties, and we did a very unique structure where it accommodated my 1031 tax requirement. And we rebranded the building. We redid the subway and the retail and made it a much more attractive building. Because I said, Sandy, why are you selling this and moving to 309 Park? He said, because when my granddaughter came to visit me, she said, Grandpa, why do you work in a shopping center? So Sandy wanted to leave because he didn't want to. He also had a fear of heights, and that's why he was on the low floor. But his main reason was his granddaughter did not like this idea. I also didn't think it was particularly elegant to enter a Class A office building to a public retail shopping sort of center with 50 stores. So we bifurcated the entrance. We made a separate office, much more bespoke entry on Lexington, and covered over this pit, similar to what they did at the GM building. That Apple Store used to be an open air retail center underground, and it was always 50% vacant because it was windy, lots of garbage, blowing around. Very similar to the sort of pit that was on the corner of 53rd and Lex with the Citigroup building. So we covered it over in glass, and it ended up being great. And then I got a very good offer from Boston Properties. Sandy Weil said something very interesting to me. He said, the main reason why you should partner with Citigroup, he says, is large institutions like Citibank are stupid. Because what they do is they try and placate Wall Street, and they're focused on the quarterly reports. Yeah. And the minute the market starts to look softer, we're going to sell this building to you at pennies on the dollar. Yeah. And I realized he's not entirely wrong, because large institutions tend to pander to Wall Street, and that's where you find this very different void between institutional investing and what we'll call multi-generational real estate investing. Even at Columbia, where you and I both attended, you're taught this notion of an IRR. Internal rates of return, I think, are very misleading because in order to calculate one, you need a terminal event. You need to sell or refinance or do something to create that exit. Otherwise, the calculation can't be closed out. And so the whole idea of an IRR, which is baked into your brain as you're learning, the finance aspects of business, is you hold an investment for a finite period of time. Real estate is the absolute, antithesis of that, if you think about it. I know that UBS at one point had a fund that was buying debt. And one of the pieces of debt they held was basically a recurring distribution from a trust. The income was very unsteady. Some years it would be huge, and other years it wouldn't. But the rate was a low double-digit rate. So what happens was the loan would get paid down. It wouldn't be a distribution for a few years, and then it would ratchet up. So you would be getting more money, and the loan balance would accrue. But they had to sell it because the fund needed this terminal event. So other than that, I'm thinking to myself, why would they ever want to sell this cash flow stream? It's a trust designed to go multiple generations. And I realized at that point that, partnerships are really not only about alignment of interests and holding periods and things that are tangible, but also intangible. The best partnerships I've ever had have been with people that I feel in retrospect have been rational, respectful, that don't make decisions based on ego, that care about their partners, and all of these qualitative characteristics that you're never taught in school. So if you have the perfect opportunity to buy an asset and it's with a partner, the metrics of whether you end up doing that deal are rarely qualitative. They're much more quantitative. Does that partner have the money? Does that partner have the deal? If so, you wed. But what factor in is this day-to-day value of a healthy relationship and the partner's willingness to subordinate their ego. Oftentimes egos will result in irrational decisions. I unfortunately didn't learn that until later on in my career. I think I made some poor decisions in retrospect because I was trying to build a reputation. I was much more aggressive. I learned a lot later studying philosophy and how the male ego sort of develops from a young person in their 20s, 30s. By your 40s and 50s, normally your ego takes a back seat. And what I find a lot of times is that there's still people in this town that doesn't happen with. There's people that they're ego driven their entire career, and they count their money and not the partnership benefit. So it's not a 1-on-1 equals more than 2. So it's whatever they can get, and that's too bad.
That's very interesting because when you talk about ego, sometimes I feel like it might be a necessary ingredient. Like ego, ambition, all these are sort of tied towards like building something like entrepreneurship and like starting your own company. Or do you think it's not true?
No, I think it's very true. I think, unfortunately, well, fortunately and unfortunately, New York City is probably the most difficult, hard, competitive city in the world as far as business. On the one hand. On the other hand, it's got the most intelligent, talented people. And, the tendency to try and muscle your way to the top has been a magnet for a lot of people that have ended up doing nefarious things and temporarily succeeding. But if you look at the long-term success of multi-generational real estate families or anybody in retail or any other business that's lasted through all the different cycles and ups and downs, it's been the honest people and the good people. And I think, when you think about the universe with people you deal with in your career, whether they're brokers or service providers or professionals of any sort, you really want to make sure that you are relied upon as being an honest and honorable person. That to me is unfortunately very much underrated. You want to know that you can be trusted. You want to know that you can be relied upon. People want to know they're going to be paid on time. Those qualities, which are obviously qualitative to a large extent, will drive long-term success to a much greater degree. It's a much bigger factor, in my opinion, than necessarily pure, acumen.
Something I've noticed as you've been talking is that you are very good in storytelling and like the ability to talk to people, connect to people, and then convince them to see the side of the story that makes sense.
Hopefully that's not seen as manipulative. I try to relate to people. Listen, I enjoy, I like good people. And when I meet people that I feel are genuine, authentic, in whatever they do, I'm attracted to them and spending time with them. To me, that's really, unfortunately, I've made a lot of business mistakes, financial losses unnecessarily have been incurred because I tend to trust overly and probably too much so, but it's hard to know, honestly. Done better in certain ventures if I would have been more diligent or less trusting, but I think on balance, it's been a net positive.
I see. Do you have examples?
I think the best example of that would be early on in my career with the loft development downtown. And this was in 1897, I think it was, Chocolate Factory on Lafayette Street between Prince and Houston. On the east side of Lafayette, which was at that time Soho, which was manufacturing, did not allow residential use, and artists were granted, life leases under Koch, under Article 7C of the law in 1982. I remember it to this day, where there were 10 artist families living in a 6-story building that was dilapidated, falling apart, leaking, no heat, elevator working and not working, depending on the day. I approached them with this concept of partnering with them. They were very reticent to trust. They had been approached by other people to buy them out. I didn't do that. They immediately assumed that I wanted all or nothing. And I realized that this was not an all or nothing opportunity. This was only an opportunity that would be remotely possible with compromise. The one thing I did want was alignment of interests. They don't have to be exactly identical financially, but relative to everybody's financial ability, there should be an alignment of interest where everybody is mutually incentivized towards the same end. And with that in mind, we structured a deal where we would buy the mortgage on this building that was being foreclosed. They would lose their homes if the bank had successfully foreclosed on them. There was a nefarious owner of the building that had defaulted on the mortgage and took the proceeds of the loan to create this full floor Park Avenue style loft in the middle of Soho. The funds were meant to improve the building. They disappeared into these arches and all sorts of columns and beautiful Romanesque design in the middle of this building and direct utility connections, et cetera. So it was really a mess. And we got to know each other. They eventually agreed to do this venture with the idea that they would put up a nominal sum. It was $50,000 per unit. They each had about 3,500 square foot units. So, I don't know, 15,000 foot floors, 6 stories. We would get the commercial space. They would get their lofts. We would do the infrastructure and have the rooftops. So we wrote up an LLC agreement and went forward. Little did I know, it took probably 6, 7 years when I thought it would take 2 or 3. We ultimately rezoned the building from Soho, which was at that time manufacturing, and did not allow anybody other than artists to buy, although those laws were not being enforced strictly. People were migrating to Chelsea then. And we rezoned the building into what was then Little Italy. That took a couple of years, and there were all sorts of protests. But because we had artists living in the building that were partners with us, it helped create some gravitas with the city and the community so that everybody was benefiting. That sort of worked its advantage throughout the process. And that was an incredible series of hurdles that had to be crossed, all of which could have, on their own, killed the deal. The first of those was finding a way to buy out this guy that had sold me half the building. That turned out to be a bad guy, bought out his interest. Then what happened was the 10 artist residents had children. They had first occupied the building in the 70s. Now the kids were growing up, and all of a sudden we had to take lead paint and asbestos out of the units. But on the top floor was a printer and a woman from England who was a very intelligent woman, fancied herself as a writer. But she was not welcomed into the partnership with the other 10 artist families. For reasons I don't quite understand, but I think that they just thought that she was a bit wacky and wouldn't really play by the rules. So the problem was that when we rezoned the building, we didn't just get a little penthouse, we got the right to add 4 more floors. The challenge, obviously, was how to do that with 10 families living in the building, including children. And the entire building needed an infrastructure, heat, air conditioning, roof, elevators, electricity, water, sprinklers. It was suffering from asbestos, lead paint, studios were being rented out to artists, little cubicles with fumes, it was awful. So long story short, I courted this woman on the 6th floor. We needed the floor vacant to take the roof off, vacate the floor, and then put 65,000 pounds of steel beams across the building to support a 4-floor enlargement. And the printer, I got moved to Brooklyn, and he was doing calligraphy and gilding for White House events for the president at the time, on stationery using a printing press that the Smithsonian took out with a crane. I mean, it was just unbelievable. So we relocated those tenants and started out on this process, and we got a construction loan. And the problem was the loan was coming due at the end of that calendar year. And I couldn't do the work until I got the top floor vacant to take the roof off. And lo and behold, this English woman was living on half the floor using the printer's space for bathing herself and the bathroom. And she had no kitchen, she had no heat, she had nothing. And she didn't want money. Had an Italian restaurant nearby for 2 years. So 104 dinners. She wanted a view of the old St. Patrick's Cathedral, which was directly opposite her loft. The roof was what she said gave her inspiration as a writer. And over dinner one night, I said, I didn't know you're a writer. Her name was Liza Bear. I didn't know you were a writer, Liza. What do you write? Well, I write a lot. And I said, well, what sort of stuff? And she said, well, I write for these, magazines. I also write books, but none have been published quite yet. I think before Amazon. So long story short, I'm scratching my head and thinking, how do I find another location to move this woman? She does not want money. She wants to do the church roof. There were 3 or 4 co-ops around the neighborhood, and I approached all of them. And I said, because they were the only tall buildings, 6-story buildings, I could see the church. They all said, we'll pass you if you want to buy a unit here. But the minute I said that Liza Bear would be living in the unit, they all said, no way. So I'm scratching my head and I'm saying, how could this be possible? She was very, very well known in the neighborhood. Turns out the whole neighborhood knew Liza Bear was crazy, and nobody wanted Liza Bear living in their building. So now it's getting close to D-Day on this construction loan expiration, and I'm reading the notices section in the New York Times, and in the legal notices I see that the U.S. Marshals had seized the Ravenite Social Club, the Gambino crime family's meeting place on Mulberry Street, a half a block south of the building. So, and they were auctioning it off. So I go into the building. The front door was ajar. I go up the stairs and the roof was open, the door to the roof. And I look north and I see there's the church right there. I said, I got to try this. It's the only shot I have. One tenant wouldn't sell their lease. I come back, I got 3 bags of brown paper bags of cash, each with different amounts. And sure enough, I knock on the door of the second guy and he slams it on me. I knock again and I said, wait, give me a chance to give you an offer. And we started low. We ended up at about $10,000. And I said, do you have the lease? And he said, yes. He says, do you have the 10,000? I said, well, almost. I'll be right back. So I ran to the bank. I came back and we signed the lease over. And at this point, Liza Bear was no longer speaking with me using English. She would only communicate using calligraphy. So every day at my office, I would get, every other day, I'd say, I would get a handle of some sort of a calligraphy drawing, which was meant to, I think, it was sort of a game, right? And I tell her, if she wants to play a game, I'll have to do the same. So I go to the courthouse the next day and I take a piece of red tissue paper and I stuffed it into the crevice of the grout in between the bricks lining the church. And I send her a treasure hunt map and clues where this key is, how many steps east, west, south, and north she's got to walk. And once she finds the key, then where to go. So it turns out that, I made it a little bit tricky, not too tricky so she wouldn't find it yet, but tricky enough where she at least get engaged. So I didn't know if she would like it. I just knew that she didn't want anything fancy, and this, I'm sure, would be a perfect spot for her. But when John Gotti took control of the Gambino family, he didn't follow any rules, and he spoke in the club, that building on the street. You could tell right away it didn't fit. Air conditioner above the door, false square front. And there was a woman named Rose McCready who lived on the second floor, and the FBI had bugged her unit. There were wood joists and hardwood floors, so no insulation or soundproofing. And they had a perfect ability to listen in on all these meetings that Gotti would be having at the Ravenite Social Club, which is 247 Mulberry Street. So I go in and Liza Bear calls me and she says, I love this apartment. I'll take it. She said, I want a loft. If you could build me a wooden loft to sleep in, I'll have more space for a desk. So I said, no problem. She still lives there to this day, actually. And we go forward and start building the project. And all these artists who have lived there forever say, we don't want doorman, we don't want anything fancy, we want to live like, this is a real loft building, this is what we like, we don't want doorman, we don't want concierges, we don't want amenities. So as it happens, the 4 new floors get bought by these super highfalutin, wealthy people. Rupert Murdoch's son bought there, or John Johnson, the Johnson and Johnson family member, and Olive Watson from IBM, the Nederlander Theater Company, Skyhound, Patrick McEnroe, the tennis player, and then you've got all these artists. So we go through the construction, and it's brutal. So I move downtown. I get calls at 3 a.m. It's a leak. I've got to come to the building. Somebody's getting rained on. We've got people taking asbestos out of other people's lofts while they're having dinner with their kids. There's plastic lining the loft, dividing it in half with guys in spacesuits coming through and taking out all this lead paint. And it's just hell on wheels. So long story short, I realized I can't sell this loft typically. In those days, Soho was all about a raw loft space. People come in and build what they want. Yeah. I've got to sell these luxury finished lofts so that no one does work because these poor people have lived through hell renovating the infrastructure and adding 4 floors on the top. The last thing I want is, these 10, 12 new residents gutting and redoing their places. So I decided to finish all the spaces at a very high level and marketed the building as a luxury building. One of the biggest challenges was that east of Lafayette Street was this sort of unknown neighborhood that hadn't quite hit its stride, was still a part of a fading, let's say, Little Italy, right? So I think it was the Times that called and said, where's the building? So I said, well, it's rezoned. They knew it was rezoned. And they said, well, what do you call it? I didn't want to say Little Italy. So I'm very nervous. My heart's racing. I have a piece of paper and I'm writing down all these acronyms. Tribeca's, Triangle Canal, and so south of Houston, and north of Houston. I'm thinking, what can I call this neighborhood to make it sound sexy, a little bit more chic than kind of like a dying end of Little Italy, which is shrinking and being absorbed by Chinatown little by little every day. So a couple of boutiques had opened, but it was nothing like it is. So I'm writing down Northern Little Italy, because I knew Little Italy was basically further south towards Canal Street. And I'm thinking no Tila and no this and that. And I just popped into my Nolita. So I said Nolita to the reporter on the end of the phone. And I guess that just got printed. And somehow Nolita became Nolita, not because I had thought about it, just because it came to me. And it spread like a virus, a viral thing. And all of a sudden, these boutiques were moving in and cafes, and it was like the hottest. What I did realize, though, at the time is that it was one of the last real neighborhoods left in New York where people knew each other. It was obviously anchored by the old St. Patrick's Cathedral, which I think set the tone. And there was a real neighborhood feel to the place, a nice feeling. Obviously, now you go there and you wouldn't recognize it. The Mulberry Street Festival still went up and down. I had to somehow stop it at Prince Street because they hated the fact that the parade. So, long story short, we get to the first board meeting. I'm finally through with the construction. It's now 5 or 6 years after I started this process to turn over the building to the new owners. After you sell 50% by state law, your attorney general, the condos are all governed by the attorney general. You're selling securities, you do a condo offering plan, and you have to step back and cede control to the occupants.
I see.
And you're no longer allowed to manage it or make the decisions, other than the commercial retail, which I retained. So now we meet in the basement, which is the little card table. I'm sitting there a little bit nervous. And all these sort of celebrities and high net worth people are sitting on the right. These purple haired artists are sitting on the left. I say, well, thank you all for coming and welcome you to the first meeting of the board of the 285 Lafayette Street condominium. And now all hell breaks loose. The artists start saying, we want to hear about the security that you've put in place on Mulberry Street with all these homeless people who are gathering there at night. It's dangerous for our kids. And the wealthy people on the right are saying, well, we don't want doormen, a fancy building, security people. It's dangerous. It's dirty. And now David Bowie, in this very thick British brogue, stands up and he says, what are you worried about, ghosts or something? And the whole room cracks up. And they all realize that this whole thing has completely shifted.
Yeah.
The artists are now caught red-handed running all these high-end amenities they never had before. And the people buying there wanted to live in a real loft. Rupert Murdoch came down to see his son Lachlan's unit, and he was living in a loft. And so we went there for tea one day, and it was a loft. I mean, elevator went right into his apartment, no security, no nothing. Larry Silverstein came down because they're all shocked at the engineering that was involved in building this building with people occupying it. So, long story short, I ended up with the penthouse and I leased it to Ian Schrager. Ian loved it. It wasn't that big, and it was a duplex, not particularly convenient for a young family with kids. So I had a daughter, and my wife was pregnant with our son, and we were looking for a third bedroom, and it was way out of our budget. So we were living in actually this building we're sitting now on the 26th floor. And one weekend while she was traveling with her sister, I called the president of Douglas Elliman, the developer of this building, owned. They owned the Milstein family owned Douglas at that time. And I said, "Is that apartment on the top still for sale? It's been a year." He said, "Yeah." I said, "Well, can I see it?" So I go up and I take a look, and it's not my style, to say the least. It had one bedroom and one guest room, and then just big open space, and it wasn't particularly attractive, but the views were great. And I said, "No, this would be good." So, "How much is it?" And he named a number. I said, "I don't have that kind of money." He says, "Well, what are you willing to pay?" So I offered, I think, a third or something of the asking price. Embarrassing to say. And he said, "Hold on, let me call the daughter of the owner." And the owner had passed away some years before. He comes back and he says, "Sure enough, she's not able to sell it at your price, but if you get to this little bit more number, she'll do it." So I called Ian Schrager. It was a Saturday. I got him on the phone, and I said, "Ian, do you still want to buy?" I told him I couldn't sell the penthouse with this big tax gain I would have to recognize unless I could do a 1031 exchange. So he says, "Well, let me." I said, "Ian, you got to tell me now or never." He's not the easiest guy, but he's a wonderful guy, great negotiator. I said, "There's no negotiator. I don't want to make money. I don't want to lose money. The price has to be exactly the same." So he says, "I'll let you know." I said, "No, you can't let me know tomorrow. You got to let me know now." He comes back on the phone. I'm on hold for like 60 seconds. He says, "I'll do it." So we ended up buying this place. And I think that building downtown, if I would have kept Ian's unit, probably would have appreciated well more than this one. But I've been very happy here for a long time. But that story was, and now I look back, I still think that building commands the highest price per foot in Soho. And it's great for me, even though I no longer have a stake in the building, to know that I helped create that, because I can look at 10 families and see that they're multimillionaires and thrilled. The staff is happy. Interestingly enough, I don't know of one artist family that ever sold. They still all live there. They have all this equity. Maybe they've taken out some loans on it or whatever, but they love the building and they're there. So I only look back on that with great fondness, even though I made less than minimum wage if I calculate it.
And you coined the Nolita.
Well,
now I
yeah,
know where
so
it comes from.
that was not scientific. That was just
It's a great
dumb
name.
luck.
So
I was so nervous because of the neighborhood not having any panache. I said, I got to figure out something for this. Nobody had heard of it. Kenmare Street and all this stuff, wasn't exactly high end. You had fish markets and electricians and welders. A couple of cafes were coming in little by little. By no means does it look like it looks now.
something I'm thinking about is, I think I asked you this just now, but you said that at any one point, if any of this didn't go through, it would have been the end. Like Allied Partners.
At about 6, I would say, near-death collisions that could have happened. I mean, narrowly.
How do you sleep at night knowing all these things? It's like, what, 7 years of stress?
My son said to me today in a text, "Dad, I can't tell if it's luck or what, but it can't all be luck." And I'm like, it kind of is when I look back on it, because somebody has to be looking down. At the time, Andrew, I really did not believe that anybody else was looking at that 285.
Yeah.
I thought I had some inside track. Turns out the whole market had seen the deal. And no one was crazy enough to do it. I was just too young and innocent to know all the risks. If you get to know the people and it becomes a relationship type of thing, you're better positioned to navigate uh, your way through rough waters. It all sort of circles back to this idea. You want to be in bed with people that have a reliable moral compass, that aren't looking to sweep the table, that look at 1 and 1 equals 3 as a model they strive for. Because unfortunately, what I learned too late, and I was guilty of this myself, certainly at a young age and even into my 30s, the ego is the biggest enemy of success. And I feel that if you can avoid letting ego work its way into your decision making, you'll end up with an outcome that's far greater than what might otherwise be the case. And if you go into an opportunity with the idea that you want to see everybody come out winners, and not with this mentality where I'm going to take it all at any cost or whatever, those deals tend to typically not work.
Yeah.
No matter how good the opportunity is, if the partnership isn't right, the other side doesn't get the right deal. Traditionally, those deals don't happen.
How do you deal with those 7 years of knowing that you're always one step away?
I think that it's really just a matter of I wanted the best for Liza. I mean, Liza Bear did not want money, so she wanted to view that church. I just figured if you are trying to put your head into her head and think about life the way she thinks about it, it'll work itself out. Now, is that something you can go to the bank on? Absolutely not. But it's worked for me as a rule. Is to try to be in a position of, if it's a lender or a seller or somebody on the other side of a deal or a partner, you always want to try and deliver to them what they expect, if not more. Right. So if you think about it like that, I don't know if it's something spiritual or it just tends to work itself out.
I see.
If you stop thinking about what you want
Yeah.
and start to think about what the other people want,
Yeah.
tend to avoid a lot of potential catastrophes.
Interesting. Thinking about this because I'm also building my own startup. And I can only foresee how there's so many days where there's like, oh, this is it. Like, it's done. Like, we are at the final countdown and it's like, okay, time to move on. Like, do I give up? Do I throw in the towel? Has there been a lot of those moments?
I've heard a little bit about your idea, and I think sometimes I would say most of the time, ideas that are simple and easy for people to understand have the best success rate. Number two, I think any business, real estate, entrepreneurial businesses, startups, existing businesses, you don't need to have some magical competitive advantage. They need to be well run. If you have a business that's well executed, that you have good infrastructure, good group of people that are committed to the business, you're far more likely to withstand, storms that are external threats, and you'll get through market dips and experience ups and downs, competition. If you can run a good business and play pretty close to error-free ball, as they say, it plays error-free ball, but learn from your errors, don't repeat them. Your chances of success are, incredibly high, in my opinion. So, it doesn't have to be a hugely interesting or novel business plan. It just has to be well executed. And if you can do that, I really do believe, and that's a more do as I say, not as I do thing, because I've always felt in real estate, you've got to find I've always found the most complex, difficult deals to be attractive.
Yeah.
Why? That I would need to go into therapy to figure out. But I do think there's a certain lesson there. It's not, the most complicated opportunities, but it is navigating You will have good days and you'll have bad days. You'll have setbacks and you'll have, successes. And I think if you can learn from your setbacks and not let them deflate you, you're going to be okay.
Yeah. And you give me a vibe that you're very relentlessly resourceful. So like when that building was listed, you would immediately just grab bags of cash, run up, and then knock on every
You
door.
have to be. In New York, in any competitive environment, you have to be. I would always say, look, you want to be under as many clouds as you can. If the rain starts, right, and the rain in this case is opportunity, you want to position yourself to be where opportunity will come. So if you think about it, what does that mean? It means you always want to be aware and never tunnel vision. I love the idea of optionality in business. Optionality in business is the most important aspect of success. If you can pivot and transition and take advantage, you never corner yourself, right? You always want to have an out, a way to pivot left, right, center, forwards or backwards. That requires forethought. What could happen? What could go wrong? Always anticipating uh, the things that could trip you up.
Yeah.
And being aware of what those things are and not being reactive to them. So think about it like a fireman puts out fires. Now you want to stop the fire from starting, not put it out.
Real estate sounds like one of those businesses where you go all in. It's not like software businesses where I can put in investments on like 20. For you,
True. There's core, there's institutional real estate where you're investing other people's money. That's a different world. I'm more interested in whether that's by design or not. I've ended up being a principal and being responsible for my successes and my failures. Some businesses are set up where they're fee driven.
Yeah.
So regardless of the outcome, the fee developer or the fund manager will make money no matter what. I stay away from those situations and I try and put myself in situations where I'm aligned with this.
You mentioned clouds and being ready for opportunities when it pops up. It sounds like you've known since like you started that the clouds would be in whatever you're doing. Did you have the foresight or
my father said to me many times actually when I was young, if you ever want to go into business, go into real estate because you can make money when you sleep. And I thought about it. I said, he's right. If you can real estate, tenants pay rent, you don't have to create a product or provide a service, you have a valuable asset, you have to be on top of it because whatever bad things could happen will happen. That same mantra holds, I think, in any business. So anticipating where things could go wrong. What I've done wrong, in my opinion, is in most cases, if I look back, I made a lot of mistakes. It's more often than not been lack of oversight, trusting people too easily, thinking I had a good idea. I certainly may have, but if I don't execute, if I don't put the right team in place, if I don't run it right, then it's not going to work. I don't care how good the idea be.
Yep.
This idea, around COVID to start charter airplane business. I bought 7 airplanes and opened a company. Everybody's going to fly private. No one wants to be stuck on a big plane and catch some virus, So sure enough, the charter plane market doubled. The hourly rate doubled. I was right about the macro, but I partnered with these 2 young guys who I thought were great. And turns out they ended up in the middle of this whole transaction. We had an agreement they could still do whatever they wanted. So they went ahead and sold their company to a much bigger company. And that bigger company sort of swallowed up my inventory. There was a lot of money made on my assets, but it wasn't coming to me. So it didn't exactly work out. It was a good lesson. But that's a great example of how, you could have a great idea and not execute it right. I should have had somebody that I really trusted that knew the business there every day. But I think from what I'm hearing about your business in terms of providing software that's so necessary and needs to be, talk about playing error-free ball.
Yeah.
You're providing a platform, in the form of Excel or whatever it is, Argus, whatever, to monitor construction or real estate or operating business. Everybody needs that. I mean, that's something that's a natural. It doesn't sound overly complicated either, which I love. Simplicity is oftentimes the easiest and highest odds of success.
Yeah.
So I think it's a great idea. I mean, everybody's thinking about AI, and I think about AI totally differently than I think other people do.
Yeah. Interesting, because I never thought about this, but you said something about not doing zero-sum games. You create value. Like you go into a property, you see the potential it could be, you go in, you create value, and everyone wins from that. AI might be something where it is positive value at the end, but some people might be harmed in the place because it just automates so many things. And it's just making me think about the tech.
Well, when you talk about artificial general intelligence, the problem with that is the assumption that everybody thinks the same is flawed. It doesn't consider that there are differences in the way people see the world and the way they treat other people. There are good people, there are not so good people. So when you talk about AGI, it assumes, logic and decision making and rational decision making is the goal, right? Now the question of whether they become nefarious or beneficial, leave that aside, right? Because everybody's complaining about or worried about the same things, right? The fear of these bots taking over humanity and doing good things versus bad things. Nobody knows. But I look at it differently. I think of it as, well, you look at the world now, look at humanity. People are different and so vastly different that what is the human brain? It's not this homogenous concept, right? It's a unique thing. So I don't even know what type of brain people would want to mimic. I think we are giving that too little attention.
Yeah.
Is the way I look at it.
It's very interesting because I talk to a lot of my friends and they always ask me, oh, will AI one day replace my job? And for a lot of them, I feel like for my previous job as well, I feel like I could compartmentalize it and say like, oh, it could replace a lot of it. But it sounds like for you, it will never replace you. Your job is to be relentlessly resourceful and to see opportunities when no one can.
Yeah, I think that's true though with pretty much every job. I mean, look, there's certain jobs that are robotic by nature, repetitive assembly line workers, but very few jobs are purely mechanical. Very few. I mean, I still feel as if AI is going to increase efficiencies and potentially perform better if it's used right. But you already see, everybody sort of dismissing these errors of logic as just a matter of time.
Yeah.
Well, we'll see. Who knows? I still think human judgment is not something that you can quantify, and it doesn't necessarily apply in the same way homogenously across the board.
Yeah.
So you have to look at it as everybody is a different person and they want different things. Any business is servicing the needs of people that want whatever it is that they want, right? Not everybody wants the same.
What do you think are the clouds for like the next decade or two from your perspective? So I know everyone's like, oh, you should go into tech, you should do AI. But if you were starting today, would you start Allied Partners again? Would you
Well,
redo
it's
everything?
funny. I feel very lucky. I mean, enormously lucky. And what I probably didn't do that I could have done is diversify a little bit. If I look back now at the compounding of the S&P and all that stuff, hindsight is 2020 is the adage that everybody always says. It's a lot of work I mean, the rewards are good, and you could also, and the risks are high, and you want to always try and modulate the risk reward. I've always been more focused on how much I could lose and not particularly focused on how much I could win. The profit was always secondary. Always look at what you could lose and prevent. So that's where you scramble and you try to cover all your bases and protect against unforeseeable events as best as possible. You can't always do that. I mean, I think people always look at real estate as, it's a gambler's thing and all that. To some extent, that's true. Depends on what you do. I look at developers that build gigantic buildings speculatively, but I also think about it and I say to myself, if I had a count, and some of the larger multi-generational real estate people in the world, and you say to yourself, how many condominium developers can you count that have won consistently over time, over generations, or even their own career? And I think the answer is going to be a single digit number. When you're building condominiums, is you're betting that your sale price is going to be higher than the cost of construction at a time in the future that is 5 years away, that you have no idea where the market will be and no ability to wait. If you look at time, which is interest, that's always your most expensive cost. If you have 5 years to wait versus 18 months, trust me, your pro forma is going to look a whole lot different than if you sold for 18 months versus 5 years, because your interest costs are. So condos are risky, and office buildings. I mean, everything is risky. Anything you build that you can't foresee what rents will be at the start is a risk. But I think that's why I tend to have gravitated towards recycling older buildings, repositioning existing assets, less ground up. I've done some. I did a shopping center up in Wood, great location, great everything, great piece of land right off the highway, right off the New York State Thruway. Perfect demographics, all the things that you look at, the quantitative metrics made sense, except for one, which is that the dirt, it was a very hilly piece of land, it was 70 acres, it was red clay. And I didn't understand that the cost of excavating red clay was about 15 times more expensive than if it was just topsoil dirt. But that's something I should have known. So let's give that one a pass. The second thing is when you build a shopping center, you're chasing the same universe of tenants that everybody else is that's building shopping centers were the only real way to retail. There's a universe of tenants that last 10 years, right? If you think about it, brands typically are 10 years and they go away. And they are a universe of tenants, and you're building, and then they might say yes or they might say no. And if they say no, what are you going to do? You got to lease the place. So you're relying on a small group of tenants that may or may not be in business when you get there. So there's a lot of risks that you can't foresee. Thankfully, I just got lucky because interest rates went down. Some REIT bought the thing at crazy cap rate, and I got saved. I've been saved, luckily, not by foresight, a few times.
Yeah. I guess it just requires you to sometimes just being in the arena and just luck.
I think that's right.
Yeah.
I think if you're in the game, you're good to people, you're reliable, you are direct. There's nothing wrong with saying no. I've had trouble saying no in my career. It's always been a struggle to let people go that have been underperforming. It's been a struggle for me to say no. I mean, these are things that you develop over lots of experience. And, you wish you had at the beginning, But I do believe that doing the right thing and having a reputation is everything. If you have a good reputation, the odds are heavily weighted in your favor to be successful. People will come to you, they'll trust you because you'll be able to bring something to the table that will help them. And I think if there's anything that you want to focus on that you can control, It's the way you treat other people, your integrity, and creating a good, consistent reputation for performance is by far the most valuable characteristics of success.
Yeah. I seem to get that from you as well. Like after the Lafayette building, derived the reputation, and then people came to you with
Yeah,
opportunities.
it does help. I mean, look, there were periods of my career where I was perceived not that way, tough, difficult, but learned from those experiences. My best partners, I mean, I've one partner that's hugely successful, but the kindest, nicest guy, tough, right? He's not going to lay over, but he's respectful, he's fair, he's honest, he treats people well, he's got no ego. So he'll mention a project that he did. His name was Bobby Carey. He's a very, very good person, uh, which would have been a huge success and probably the first thing most people would brag about. It's the last thing Bobby would mention. You trust him and you want to be part of people like that. So,
Just still absorbing into the fact of this reputation concept. It has huge payoffs that you don't see, that is very visible, but it comes to you only in like hindsight.
yeah,
But in the upfront, people always play short-term games. They always just try to sweep everything off the table.
always. I mean, it's interesting. Markets are like that too. Geographical markets, like Miami. Like, I didn't do business there. My mother's side of the family has relatives in Miami. So I vacationed there as a kid, but I didn't start doing business there until 10 odd years ago. And I must tell you that the difference in the mentality of a place like Miami versus New York is night and day. There's such a hit and run, short term, Wild West thought process. People go there, they reinvent themselves, and they've had a problem in their original hometown or wherever they came from. They come to Miami, nobody really looks at their past. It's a whole different mentality and psychology, which is a shock because, in many cases, you look at these people and you say, if you put as much effort into doing the right thing that you put into trying to take the quick buck, it's night and day. You'd be so much better off. They're focused on how quickly they can make a buck and how quickly they can screw you and run off with your money. I'm thinking to myself, this is nuts. I'm shocked by it, but I tell you, I think it's many factors contribute to it. The age of the city, the fact that it's so international, it's more anonymity. There's no real legacy yet. People's reputations are not necessarily knowable, or they haven't had ample time to be established. In New York, on the other hand, your reputation, you wear it on your sleeve, right? So everybody knows it. It's a very small town as far as whatever industry you choose to pursue. Real estate, is obviously lots of buildings in this town, but there's very few people in business at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a big difference. Doing business in Miami is completely different world, which I've learned the hard way.
And you still have some ventures there. So you still have to grow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But,
Another thing you mentioned is on people and hiring, not on partners, but on employees or people who work for you. Like, what are lessons you've learned on that side? Like, when it comes to
I've not been, to be perfectly honest, I've not been the best hire. And it's one of those things I haven't quite figured out why. I have gotten lucky with some great people. And I've also hired some people, impulsively that have not worked out in the hope that I would be right.
Yeah.
And not realizing that the cost of replacing somebody is much higher than taking the time to hire the best in class and good people that will, be committed and people that you can really deliver a career to.
Yeah.
And a happy work environment to.
Yeah.
it's not unlike any other relationship. It's probably more so like a marriage than a marriage because you're spending more time at the office or at least in work than you are with your spouse in many cases.
Yeah.
So that decision of who, is in your office is a massive one in terms of trust, competence, reliability, loyalty. I mean, the list is endless. And you want to make sure that and it's not easy because certain people, they're going to be flighty and they're going to jump on the next, big bandwagon they think they can. You end up investing a ton of energy and time into somebody they leave.
Yeah.
So it's a very important thing. And I've been fortunate that at least my core group of people are young and energetic, are incredibly loyal and bright, and really hardworking. Intelligent goes without saying, intelligence, but I think most important is loyalty and dedication. No ride out, good, bad, and ugly times, equally.
Makes no sense. Yeah. I seem to get a lot of the key theme from you is people, reputation, hiring, partnering.
Look, I mean, a lot of this is not because I've done it perfectly. I want to be clear about that. I think, I've made mistakes, but I've learned, I feel like as I look back honestly and reflectively, whatever mistakes I've made, I've learned from. And that's the key. I mean, no one's perfect. If I had to redo certain things, I probably would. But I think in any event, I've learned when I've made mistakes and should have done things differently, both in terms of terminating relationships in the workplace as well as hiring people.
Yeah.
I mean, there are certain bosses that are known to be super straightforward and tough.
Yeah.
I've had trouble being super clear and tough on people. And it's not fair because your expectation levels should be made clear.
Yeah.
And it's easier said than done in many cases, right? You don't want to hurt people. You don't want to deflate their enthusiasm. These are things that you have to sort of put into the calculus of how you relate to your people. So, it's not been easy because at the end of the day, you're only as good as your staff or your support, right? You can't succeed without having good people around you.
Yeah.
At least the core group,
How do you? Something I'm struggling to get as an entrepreneur is that we are very resourceful, or we try to be very relentlessly resourceful. Like we take control of everything and then we just go and do it.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas with employees, it's hard to give them that sense of ownerships. Has that been a struggle for you, or has that been very easy?
No, it's been a struggle. I mean, I think, if I'm being as honest with myself as I could, I would say the best dynamic that I've had in my office has been everything functioning well in terms of the infrastructure and the organization, the detail, execution of all that stuff, leaving me with the creative space to be comfortable knowing that everything's okay over there and not to worry about, and having room to just think about opportunities, things that can go wrong, things that go right, creativity. That's been the best. And it's not always been the case, but during those periods of my career, if I look back after 30 years, those stretches have always been the most productive. It's been when I've been stuck having to, react and put out forest fires that shouldn't have started in the first place, worry about nonsensical, office politics and things like that have been most difficult. I think, having the respect for the people that hold the fort down and keep things running is not to be underestimated by any means.
Yeah, it's very interesting. So you're going to hire people mostly to make sure that the machine is going to run.
Yeah, you want to have as I say, error-free ball, and you will make errors is key, but you will make errors. So then the question is, when you make them, implement systems to prevent them from happening again. you're only going to get a certain number of chances. If you keep repeating the same mistakes, your organization's going to implode, not explode, right? You're going to fail from within, not because of any external sources. So interest rates or the market's vicissitudes and demand and supply and all that stuff will happen. Cycles will happen. But if you can keep your company running, efficiently and not repeat mistakes and have a pretty good ability to forecast where things could go wrong and prevent them from going wrong, you're going to be so much better positioned for success. I think that allows you to be opportunistic. I can give you a million examples of feeling the freedom to travel to conventions or give a talk here or there, where I made incredibly fortuitous contacts with people that I wouldn't otherwise have been able to meet if I would have been stuck in the office or, unable to grab a coffee with somebody unrelated to anything, right? So you don't want to be in control of it. You want to be able to delegate and be confident in the people that you have doing, that stuff for you.
I see. It's fascinating. Never had that perspective before. As in, it sounds like throughout your whole story, a lot of times has been you call it getting lucky, but I call it just being there and it rains and you collect the things. But it required you to be out there
Yeah,
doing
for
it.
sure.
And the only way you could be out there doing it is that your whole team staff everything is running properly.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
exactly right. No, I think as you said earlier, I do read people well, and I have learned to over time be able to tell if somebody's genuine or they're just talking a lot and don't really, have anything, what they say, empty suits, that term. If somebody has substance and they're honest and they've got a straight north facing moral compass, you want to be around those people and you want to, make sure that you're in position of being able to benefit them and, obviously, likewise, you benefiting from them is critical. And so you want to try and first be around the right people. It doesn't mean the most successful, it means the best people, character.
Yeah.
You're around the best people, good things will happen.
I think the other thing about starting a business is you have a million things you could do, but you have to prioritize. So in the early days, we would talk to ChatGPT and be like, what should we do? And ChatGPT would be like, you should just focus on this. And we'll be like, sounds good, let's just do this. It works well because it's less biased by the emotional side
That's
that
right.
we have sometimes.
That's true.
And it remembers from all the previous conversations.
Yeah.
Like, oh, you said this that day. You shouldn't forget
does.
about talking to John.
Yes, it
Yeah.
does. It gets.
Whereas
to know
humans,
you.
we forget. Yeah.
1,000%.
We build trust, but we can't.
No,
Right.
you're right. You're right.
Did you have work-life balance when you started Allied, or no more travel?
Allied, I did the Bhutan trip in '97,
So it was like 8 years.
4 years after I founded it. Then I started to then it went work, travel like this.
Yeah, less travel.
Yeah.
Work every day.
I kept saying one more deal, but now I'm thinking,
Does it stop?
yeah,
No. Can we just become less ambitious and be like,
yeah,
okay,
yeah.
it's time to take a break?
I think so. Now, like in the next couple of years, I want to wind down. I'm thinking I'll work another couple, 2 more years.
Yeah.
Maybe 3, 2 to 3 at most. And I'm not even working as hard as I used to. I used to have way more energy, way more.
That's it for the conversation between Eric and I. Thank you so much for joining us today on the show. I love interviewing people who build things, the ups and downs, the challenges, the wins. So like and subscribe to stay tuned to more episodes. And let me know if there's someone that you think I should talk to. And get in touch with me via email and LinkedIn. Thank you.